First up, we have David Cook. He's going to tell us about linked data in Koha. David's a systems librarian at Prosentient Systems in Sydney, and he's contributed over 100 patches to Koha, so that's pretty awesome. David's originally from Canada, and he spent 6 years coding, implementing and maintaining systems like Koha, DSpace and Fedora for a wide range of clients. But I think he's going to tell you, he's actually originally, he started shelving books in the library. So please welcome David, and we're going to hear about linked data in Koha.
Okay, just move this up. Is this all good? Cool. So my last conference presentation was over 4 years ago, so a little bit rusty. You know, I'd much rather be sitting at my desk right now listening to music and coding. But I think I have some stories that are kind of worth sharing. And we're just going to sit on this slide actually for a little while because I've changed my notes in light of things that people were saying yesterday. You know, we've been talking about what should they be teaching in library school. Oh, I don't know how to code, things like that. And as Hugh mentioned, I started in libraries about 12 years ago, shelving books, doing circulation, and that started off in like an academic library. I moved to a new city, went to another academic library where I was shelving books, doing circulation, moved to a government library where I was doing the same thing, but then I started cataloging, and I must have been doing something right because I kept getting new contracts to do different things. One of them was moving 3 different branches with over 100,000 books in over 29 languages all into a central location, which actually ended up also being moving all the office furniture and coordinating the entire thing, which was interesting, into a space that wound up being about 4 feet narrower than the architect said. So to, you know, adhere to fire codes and stuff like that, I had to do a lot of really quick thinking. And after that, you know, we did an ILS migration, and after that, I worked at a private law firm library, and I thought that was where I was going to go until one fateful day a friend said, there's a library job in technology in Australia. You should check it out. And 6 years later, here I still am. I'm pretty much completely self-taught when it comes to coding. I did a 12-hour PHP class in my master's and a 6-week database class. So not very much. And the people who were teaching me were librarians, and one of them was not a very good coder. So I've had to learn a lot over the past 6 years. I guess something I'd like people to take away is, you know, even when you have a lot of experience and a lot of education, there's going to be stuff that you don't know, which was definitely the case with this project. But let me get started. So let's see. So what is linked data? You know, Matt Miller has already talked a fair bit about it, but I'm hoping to kind of drill down a little bit more. So to me, linked data is RDF plus HTTP. Pretty easy. I'm sure that's super clear to everyone sitting here right now. Maybe not. So RDF, quite simply, is just a 3-part data model. And even that might sound scary, but basically it's a subject, a predicate, and an object. Typically, each of these parts is a URI, like you can see up there, but sometimes it's just a literal string. So looking at this example up on the screen, which is written in Turtle, which stands for Terse RDF Triple Language. The first line is the subject. The second line, I'm not going to read the full URI, but the one ending in full name is the predicate, and in this case, the object is the string David Cook. So I'm person 1, my full name, David Cook. Pretty easy. I know there's another 2 lines there, but let's just kind of ignore those for the moment. When I talk about HTTP, I'm referring to Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and that should look familiar to everyone. You know, that's how we interact with our web browser. That's how we get to web pages. It's how we interact with REST APIs. It's basically, and underpins everything that we think of as being web. It's the web in semantic web. So returning to these last 2 lines, you can see 2 URIs. That semicolon after my name lets us reuse the subject from the first line. So it's still, you know, person 1 has quality, awesomeness. And a real example, so I'm kind of cheating by making URIs that are significant. Instead of awesomeness, that could be the number one. It could be anything. It could be nonsense. But in a real world example, you'd be able to resolve that URI, and fetch back a label in English that says awesomeness. Or you might fetch back 30 labels saying awesomeness in English, French, German, Swedish, whatever. I think Matt was already talking about this. That's really like the power of linked data, is that you're, with one single line, you're leveraging all this work that someone else has already done. So we've talked about linked data a little bit. There's also Koha. I imagine that some of you probably know what Koha is. I'd hope that it's everyone, but maybe not. So Koha is an open source integrated library system. In Australia, we usually just call those, library management system. I think this is a graphic that originated in America. As noted before, I've had over 100 contributions accepted into Koha over the past 6 years, and lots more kind of waiting in the pipelines. And the rest of the presentation is going to be talking about the latest contribution, I guess, that I've been working on. Let's see. The project. We're still just on background, not anything too interesting. But basically what happened is in 2015, the National Library of Sweden contacted me and asked me to build an OAI PMH harvester. And OAI PMH just stands for Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. They wanted to download records from Libris, which is the union catalog that contains records for all libraries in Sweden. And they wanted to harvest those records into the Stockholm University Library. And at that point, it was just MARC records. It was easy. I did one version. They weren't quite happy with it. I did another version. They were really happy with it. So happy that they then asked me to tweak it a little bit so we could import RDF into Koha. And I guess that was in 2016 that they made that change. And Magnus Enger of Librarian in Norway was contracted by the National Library of Sweden as well to actually display that metadata in the OPAC on Koha. And around that time, we were also talking, because we're a global community working on Koha, we found out that Bywater Solutions in the USA was also working on RDF. So we all started, kind of spitballing ideas, trying to decide what way we should go with Koha. And I think at some point in there, Bywater's kind of priorities shifted, and the conversation started to falter a bit, so we just ended up leading the way. So up next, the journey. This is where it actually gets kind of interesting. I should start off by saying that I knew absolutely nothing about RDF or linked data at the start of this. Like zero, nothing, not a clue. Like all of you probably right now have more of an idea about what RDF and linked data is than I did back then. So I tried to research. I read articles, I read ebooks, I reached out on Twitter, I sent emails, I combed the web. And it seemed like the consensus was basically that there were no existing best practices, there was a lack of tools, BibFrame wasn't production ready. I think there's a talk actually later today that kind of talks about that a bit more, which I'm super excited to go to. And generally, there was lack of experts. There was in my conference paper, I cite it specifically, but I think it was a paper that came out of the University of Oregon in the US, explicitly saying we need to hire people because no one knows how to do this. So in a way, it felt kind of comforting that everyone else was as lost as me. But then I realized there actually were examples of RDF being used. There was the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Oslo Public Library, Libris, OCLC. They were all using RDF, experimentally, but they were still using it. Unfortunately, they were all doing it differently. There was no kind of one standard to unite them, to kind of lead the way. So I had to do it myself. Based on the examples I was seeing around the world, I did have an idea of where to start. I wanted a software library that would let me work with RDF data. For those that don't know, Koha is written in the Perl programming language, so I looked for a Perl library, which is RDF Trine. I'd heard about it over the years and figured I'd give it a go. and it seemed to work. Then we needed a place to put the RDF data, which was called the triple store. I tried Virtuoso, which had an advantage of being available in Debian, which is the Linux operating system that Koha has mostly developed to work on out of the box. But unfortunately, it was kind of buggy. It didn't support the most recent version of Sparkle. And so I just decided it was too hard. People suggested workarounds, but I didn't want to hack together a solution and have that be kind of the beginning of it. I can understand hacking something later, but in the beginning, that's not really what you want to do. And I'd heard of Apache Fuseki from working on DSpace, so we ran that up, and it was working great. Unfortunately, that's when we started to find problems with the RDF Trine library. So, I found software bugs, and I felt kind of stuck because, unlike with the triple store, there wasn't an alternative. I couldn't just throw it out and say, oh, I'll use this other one instead. But at that point, I realized this is open source. The advantage is that I can just go in and make changes. So I did that, and I talked to the author of RDF Trine, and we collaborated together using GitHub to share our code and using IRC to communicate. And I think I pushed 2 or 3 patches in the end to fix all the problems that I was finding. And yeah, for all the kind of nitty-gritty of that, that's in the conference paper. I won't go into that because it can be maybe a little bit too technical. There's a little bit that I want to talk about, kind of going off what someone was saying yesterday about, anyone can code, or I can get my teenager to code for me. And that's kind of true. Coding is actually not that hard. But coding well is really, really, really hard. It's not quite as easy as just noticing a bug in a piece of software. Even though you can fix it in, say, a minute, it actually takes time to, to submit it to the original author, to get it through kind of testing and released. And even when I'd fixed the RDF Trine library, that was only fixing it for one particular community, and that was kind of the Perl community. There was another community, and that's the Debian community, because Koha typically, out of the box, uses software packages. They're kind of managed and maintained by the Debian community. So even though I'd fixed it, for Perl, I needed to fix it for Debian as well before it could ever really be adopted by Koha. And that's been quite the process. But it's an important process because that's how you get something that actually works and works well. So I thought I just would kind of highlight that. So yeah, at this point, I found my software library, I found the triple store, I'd found the bugs, fixed the bugs, found the bugs, fixed the bugs, and I figured I was done. I could download, process, and store RDF in terms of the contract. I figured I was done. But then I remembered that Koha is a mark-based system. It doesn't understand RDF. Mark and RDF are not the same thing. So even though it's storing thousands of RDF triples in a triple store, Koha couldn't really do anything with that. And due to time and budget constraints, what we ended up doing was deciding that we'd harvest data from the Libre Union Catalog using both Mark and RDF, because that way we could put the Mark into Koha, and then we could also download the RDF kind of separately and then link the two. So linking linked data to non-linked data turned out to actually be harder. Like in theory, that sounds really easy, but it's not. Because as you can see up there, the URI from some external RDF catalog isn't going to necessarily match up with your MARC record, which uses a local identifier. And at that point, I was feeling a little bit stuck, but the answer actually turned out to be super obvious. As you can see lower down, you can just use the URL of your OPAC. Like that's because the HTTP URI, or that URL for your OPAC, is the same thing as what's in your MARC record, in theory. Like those two should map. And this idea came to me after I was looking at records at the BNF and Libris, because they used triples, kind of like you can see at the bottom of that screen there, using the OWL see also or RDFS see also predicates. They were linking their RDF catalog with a non-RDF catalog. But there was still one problem, and that's that we were downloading this RDF that already had these links. They're already pointing to an OPAC. It just wasn't the Koha OPAC. It was the Libris OPAC, the BNF OPAC. And that's when I realized that we didn't actually want to link the incoming RDF that we were downloading to Koha's MARC record. All this time we've been thinking about importing linked data. The contract said import linked data. But you don't actually want to do that. You don't want to import linked data. What you want to do is you want to link to linked data. You want to create a link from your local system to the external documents. We've been thinking way too old world. All we needed was an RDF record in Koha. So what I did is I created something just like this. It's one triple, 3 lines, that would take the URL for the MARC catalog, which would serve as the RDF subject, use RDFSC also as the predicate, and then use the Libris RDF subject as the object. That way, when loading a web page, Magnus's code could then use the URL for Koha and then reach out to external systems and kind of explore it from there. So unfortunately, it's still a work in progress. I wish, based on the title, that linked data support was already available in Koha. It's not. Even though my ideas and my code all work, and they work really well, it's still being tested by people around the world. Koha has a really kind of rigorous quality assurance process, which means that, when you download it, you get a good product. But because this work is so kind of innovative and big, it also makes it kind of intimidating to test. So it's a little bit slow going. I also think, I haven't checked with Magnus recently, but I'm not sure that his code to display the RDF in the OPAC has actually been finished either. And there's no system for dereferencing linked data. And what I mean by that is, at the moment, if you, thinking about those triples I was showing before, at the moment all you see is that URI. Matt showed us some really cool visualizations based on the idea that you can take the URI, resolve it, and get something. But we don't have that system. And doing that on the fly would also not really be very performant. If you're having to do 30 requests to external servers all at the same time, it's going to be really slow, and it's just not going to work very well. So you have to kind of do that probably periodically to build up a cache of local data. And so I sometimes think, by the time my patches have actually made it into Koha, I will have already thought of better ideas about what we could be doing. But at this point, that'll just cause further delays. In any case, there are still a lot of questions left. And so at this point, I kind of will break from what I was doing and kind of try to talk a little bit about the future. Remember how at the start of this talk I said that I had no idea about linked data? I still kind of don't. I've got working. I know what RDF is. I know what linked data is, but I still don't really know where the future is. Over the past few years, I've been lucky to kind of work with a whole bunch of different things, like Fedora Commons 4. I've just started working with that, kind of over the last year or so, and it actually uses RDF natively. It doesn't use MARC or Dublin Core or whatever. Well, it uses Dublin Core, but via RDF. And that's really cool. I think, Koha probably could get to that point, because Fedora already shows that it works. You don't have to have the MARC record. You can just use the RDF. And with Ex Libris Alma, with BibFrame, there's a register online, which I cite in the conference paper. And it says, Ex Libris said that back in mid-2017 that they were going to add support for BibFrame 2.0 to Alma. And they were going to add an editor for editing BibFrame. They were going to make it so you could export BibFrame and so you could import BibFrame. And I think editing and exporting BibFrame is really cool. All the power to them on that one. But I think importing BibFrame, that's something I'm a lot more skeptical about. Because in this project, I've kind of learned that you don't want to actually be treating BibFrame as an exchange format. you want to be linking. So I'm not really sure where they're going with that one. That being said, there are times where you do want to import stuff. Lots of you probably buy content from EBSCO, which will usually provide like a mark dump, and which you can just load in. They're not going to provide you probably with BibFrame that they can load in. Like you'll have issues with your subject URI unless they're making it perfectly for your system, which then runs into all sorts of other issues. Like they should just be able to say, EBSCO should be able to just have a whole bunch of RDF data describing all of their resources and just say, here are the subjects that you should be linking to. And then in that way, your import would actually be something that you could handle all yourself. Like you'd have some IT people who could then build in these external URIs into your system, whether that's Koha or whatever. And more recently than that, just in the past month or so, I've come across another system called Reasonable Graph, which is coming out of Greece. And that project actually made me think about OCLC. They have a whole bunch of, pretty much everything on WorldCat at the moment. If you scroll down to the bottom, there'll be a little box that says linked data, and you can expand that, and there's a whole bunch of data labeled experimental. But it's all RDF, and they actually do link to external sources like DBpedia. And the one thing that really stood out for me was I was looking at the record for Good Omens, which is a Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman collaboration. And the place of publication, so there would be a predicate that says place of publication, and it would and it referred to a DBpedia URI for New York City. I'm like, this is awesome. This is linked data. This is what we want to be doing. And if you look further, there's a section called related entity, and there it had the subject for DBpedia New York City, and a predicate of schema name, which is schema.org vocabulary, and it had an object that just said New York. And I thought that was really interesting. I was like, how are they doing this? Are they dereferencing that? Are they then only getting one triple back from DBpedia? What's going on here? I looked at the DBpedia entry and couldn't see any predicate called schema name. I couldn't even see a string that said New York. So I think what's probably going on there is that OCLC has just manually entered in their own triple using the DBpedia subject. So they're describing an external resource, but describing it locally, which is interesting. Like you could, in that way, DBpedia kind of functions as a sort of authority record that you could look at, and they're just providing kind of local data about it. But that kind of defeats, I think, the purpose of linked data, because you're not actually resolving that URL and you're not leveraging the work of others. So I'm actually really curious to find some OCLC people here to see what they can say. Looks like I'm running out of time, so I might skip a few things. Actually, I will talk about the IT world bit. There was someone at the last talk saying how Google was embracing linked data. And I actually talked to a former Google engineer just a couple weeks ago at a Linux conference. And she basically said she'd never heard of RDF and the semantic web working at Google. Chances are it's not really much of a thing anymore. Like they thought it would be interesting, but they're not really moving that way. And if you talk about RDF and linked data in IT circles, no one will have any idea what you're talking about, which is kind of depressing because we think that it's the future for libraries, and everyone else just kind of has a little bit kind of discarded the idea. But that being said, RDF is still used by XMP, which is the extensible metadata protocol, I think, which is used by Adobe Lightroom and Darktable for organizing photographic metadata. And it's also used by IIIF for their own schema, which is really cool. Like it doesn't really work as linked data, but it's a very flexible data format. And I think that that's where we have some possibility. So yeah, this is a great XKCD slide where the answer seems to be, well, let's just create BibFrame or something. It'll be the one universal standard to rule all standards, but the reality is probably going to be that we're going to wind up with 15 different standards. As I was saying, BNF, Libris, OCLC, they're all using different things. So what's really going to lead the way? And yeah, I think it's been a bit of a struggle, but I'm still open to hearing from others. So actually, that, I'll probably open up to questions. Yeah.
If you do have any questions, if you could please make your way down to the front to a mic. And we are, sorry, this is my fault, we are running slightly behind time, so if you could be quite succinct, that would be awesome.
Hello. Hey, David. It's Ben Chadwick from Education Services Australia. Thank you for coming out from behind your desk. It was a very interesting talk. I've got so many questions for you, but I'll try to limit it. Early on, what kind of bibliographic schemas were you seeing coming through in the RDF? Was it Dublin Core primarily, and how's that changing as time's gone on?
That's a super interesting question. I'm seeing a huge mix. There's a bit of Dublin Core, there's a bit of SKOS, there's a bit of BibFrame, which is kind of terrifying because the website says this isn't production ready, but people are using it. And then there's a whole lot of, not proprietary formats, but kind of individual formats. Like for instance, like Matt Miller's talk, you could see on the New York slide that they were using their own schema for a lot of things. Libris uses its own schema for a lot of things. So it's a total mishmash.
And they might owl through to some other schema they can link to, but in the meantime you have to work with their sort of proprietary one. And
well, actually, yeah, that's totally the thing too. And actually, that's what I meant to mention with IIIF, is that because they're only using their own schema, they know exactly what to do, how to deal with it. But when you have this mishmash of different schemas, even if you are resolving URIs to external sources, you don't know what's coming back. And that can be tricky.
Can I ask another one? So we were talking this morning about where does the library's data sit? Where's the library in all of this? And do we let go of our data and send it out to Wikidata, or who's going to own it? Maybe Google will own it, or I think that every library can own its own data, and I, God forbid, don't think maybe even OCLC should own it. So the problem then, though, if you're pointing out the data and dereferencing it, is indexing it locally. Have you got any thoughts about that problem?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, because that was something that Bywater especially were interested in. Like when you dereference the data, you have to get something that's kind of like human readable, or something indexable, because otherwise you're linking to all this data, but no one's ever going to find it, right. Unless you have something local. So yeah, whether that's you're getting data from external sources, or maybe you're doing the OCL thing of adding your own data to refer to the external things, I don't know, but it's I think a lot about who owns the data, and I think I didn't get into that too much, but yeah, I'm super keen for individual Koha libraries to have their own data as well, and then cached copies of external data. But I thought the Wikidata thing was really cool as well. Like that's a really good way, I think, of probably keeping a certain amount of persistence, because we all know that URLs change all the time.
True. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Hugh, do we have time? 2 minutes, okay. First thing is that Marty Heyman, the Executive Director of Metadata Services and Strategy from OCLC, is going to be on the roundtable today.
I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, so you saw that, great. And if it's unlikely in library land, I'm just putting it out there, it's unlikely in library land that we're ever going to get a universal sort of standard. So how horrible is that going to be if we just have a number of different competing standards? And is that the new reality, is that we should be accepting that this is what we're working with, stop striving for one universal standard?
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that at one point, how I think some of these early innovators have kind of like fragmented the landscape potentially, and I don't know that we are going to get that universal standard. Maybe that's actually a good thing, because in a way, because when people are like, oh, linked data is the future, linked data kind of operates off this like central model, whereas a lot of, especially the tech world, is like, blockchain, Git, all these things are like decentralized. So maybe it does make sense to actually come back to a point of having our own schemas, and I mean, that introduces a lot of difficulty, because how do you link to something that to a language you don't speak? But maybe we can be flexible too. I think maybe Mark's going to be around for a long time, but I think the whole exchanging of data like that's probably going to be going out, and maybe we'll have like a subset of data be like, if you want to be able to link to other libraries, you have to have this particular vocabulary, but aside from that, do whatever you want.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you, David. That was really fascinating. If you could all just give David another round of applause. Thank you. Here's your pin.